What more should you know about your resume? Stay tuned for Resumes That Produce Results Part 2 question and answer session. I am your moderator, Cesara Johnson, and this is sponsored by Knowledge Staff. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our behind the scenes session with Ross Squire. This is based off of the Resumes That Produce Results webinar. So we had questions that we weren't able to address during the webinar. We had a great session, but we weren't able to address everything, but we promised to have all of the questions answered. So once again, I want to present to you Ross Squire, the president of Knowledge Staff. And again, Knowledge Staff, well, what is Knowledge Staff? Knowledge Staff is a leading consulting and staffing firm in New York City, placing many business professionals in positions in the New York City metropolitan area and also nationwide. So without further ado, one more time, Ross Squire, the president of Knowledge Staff.
Hello, everybody.
That's great. So we have a couple of questions that we have here, and I'm going to let's start with some formatting questions, Ross. So during the webinar, you were talking about the importance of keywords and the hot buttons and those type of things. And someone asked, should you bold the keywords throughout the resume? What do you say about that?
I think it's not a bad idea to use some bolding. I've seen people that have kind of gone overboard. So I think initially, if you want to maybe in the summary section, bold some things that are particularly important to the client and the job that they're looking to fill, then maybe that makes sense. But I find that to bold every keyword throughout the entire resume can actually be a little bit too confusing. So I wouldn't recommend that.
Oh, okay. That's good. Okay. So next I want to, let's see. So we were also talking about the summary section, and you gave a lot of great advice about what to put in the summary section. Someone said, well, it feels like it might be too much reading to have the summary section. Do you think so, Ross?
Yeah. The summary section that I used in the example, I think had 5 or 6 bullets, which is actually too much. So I think that's a good comment and question. I would probably try and limit it to maybe 3 or 4 bullets that really captures the essence in what's being called for in the job description. I think if it gets a little bit longer than that, it maybe is a little bit too long.
Okay, so do you think you can have multiple hot buttons or keywords per, I guess, line in the summary section? Can you have multiple keywords in a line?
I think you can. I think the gist of the summary section is to present your qualifications and to show your relevance for the job. So it's not so much about keywords as it is addressing the things that are really being stressed in the job description. And certainly within those bullets, you can include some of the keywords, but it's not so much about the keywords as it is demonstrating right up front, right at the beginning of the resume, hey, these are my skills, this is why I'm relevant for my job, for your job, and this is why you should continue reading. Versus not including that and having maybe people make an inaccurate assessment in 10 seconds and move on to the next resume.
Okay, Ross, we had a question where someone who was more advanced in their career asked, well, should they dumb down the contents in their resume just to get a job?
That is an excellent question. So ultimately, the resume is not going to get you the job. The resume is going to get you the interview. So in dumbing down the resume, what it basically is doing is opening the door for you to find out more about the job to decide whether the job is on target for you or not. So there are some people that think that if I dummy it down, at least that gets me in the door. I can find out more about the opportunity, and then I'm the one that holds the cards versus the company deciding that I'm overqualified. So there's kind of 2 schools of thought. I want to make sure that I stress the importance of making sure that you're honest and that you don't deceive people in your resume. But there are ways that you can re-emphasize certain skills and experience that are being demanded in a job description. Again, going back to the description of a person that has a resume with management responsibilities and worker bee responsibilities, contributor responsibilities. Well, if the job is a contributor job, then I would really stress those first and maybe de-emphasize the management. So if that's what you're talking about in terms of dumbing down, I guess I would be in favor of that. But ultimately, you know whether the job is right for you. So if you've been a manager your entire life, the last 10 years of your life, that's what you're committed to. That's what really gives you a charge in your business. It doesn't make sense to really apply for a job that's a contributor job. I'll leave that one up to you.
That makes sense. So one of your participants today actually submitted a question as well, and they wanted to know that, is it okay for them to change the titles of their of the jobs that they had in their resume?
Yeah, I actually don't think that that is a bad thing to do, especially if the titles that you're using are consistent with the job that you're applying for. So as I mentioned, a learning designer in one company is an instructional designer in another company, is a learning specialist in another company, is a training and development specialist in another. As long as you're not changing the title to represent something that you're not, I think it's okay to do.
Oh, that's good. Okay, good. So we have from Jennifer. She asks, how do you fit all of those years of experience on just 1 or 2 pages, especially if you're experienced?
Yeah, again, unless you're a consultant, I think that 2 pages is kind of where you want to shoot for in terms of the most number of pages that you have. I've seen people use different methods, and we've used them also. Sometimes if you're going back maybe 10 years or so, or 15 years tops, and you've got more experience, you could have a section that says additional experience, and then just list the company and the title and the years without any sub bullets. That's a way to include the experience, but not have it go on and on and on. Again, you want the resume and the real estate of the resume to contain as much relevant information as being called for in the job description. So sometimes the way to pare down the resume is to not include those things that are not being called for in the job description that you're responding to.
That's good. And from Steve asks, how would your resume advice vary depending on whether you're talking to a beginning professional versus a mid-career professional?
Yeah, for people looking for entry-level jobs, it's a challenge because you don't have a lot of relevant experience that you can really cite. But if you are going for an entry-level job, that means that the company's not expecting that much. So a lot of the same theories and approaches that we talked about in the webinar apply. And that is, this document, this resume, is a marketing document. And it needs to tell a story about who you are, what your differentiators are, and why the company should bring you in for an interview. So you may want to have, if you've got education in the learning space or in instructional design, you may want to stress that. You may want to list classes that you've taken that are relevant. Classes in adult learning theory, classes in technology, classes in organizational development, classes in organizational psych. You may want to list some of those. Clearly, any internships that you've done that are relevant, you'd want to list those. And that's pretty much how you would construct the resume for someone just looking to break into the field.
And in that case, I do want to recommend Take the Time to Invest in You. That was the first webinar of this series that Ross Squire did, and he actually gives you tips and tricks on how to make sure you can develop your career and actually enhance your resume during this, I don't want to call it necessarily downtime, but during this time that you have at home during this coronavirus pandemic. So make sure that you also check out the Take the Time to Invest in You webinar. We'll actually have the link for that. We'll show that soon as well, so at the end of the video. So we have one more from Jennifer. Jennifer asks, how do you keep track of each resume? If I'm supposed to have more than 10, do you suggest some kind of coding or some sort of naming convention?
Yes, yeah, I do actually. And the naming convention that you would have for the resumes in your directory on your computer would be different than the resume names that you would assign for the resumes being sent to the client. That should basically have your name, a date, and that's fine. So what you want to do is you want to be able to use a naming convention that helps you to remember what the resume is about. It could be that you list the job title and the company that you responded to. You may want to have subdirectories for resumes that are structured for instructional design jobs, some that are more focused on e-learning design and development, maybe others that are focused on platform delivery. The idea is to have something in the name of the file that will help you to easily remember what that resume was, and hopefully you'll recall what the job was all about, how it was structured, so that as you build future resumes, it can become more of a cut and paste exercise than having to start from square one.
That's great. Okay, so it sounds great. Now you said one thing that will kind of lead to the next webinar that we will be having on May the 12th. You were talking previously about whether a resume should be 1-2 pages or more, and you said that unless you're a contractor, that 2 pages should be sufficient. So that goes into the future webinar that we're going to have. Can you talk really quickly about the next webinar that people need to be ready to sign up for?
Great. So the topic of the title of the next webinar is called "So You Want to Be a Learning and Development Consultant," and it's really designed for people that are considering making the move from being a full-time permanent employee for a corporation to working for yourself, and to hanging out your own shingle as a consultant. And it presents questions, it presents things to reflect on, or it presents advice, it presents challenges that you'll face as a consultant. And the goal of the webinar is to hopefully have you become clear about whether it's a viable career path, whether it's a viable thing to consider for yourself going forward. Because what I have found over the years is that everyone has this idea about what it's like to be a consultant until you become a consultant. And all people are not cut out to be consultants. So the purpose of the webinar is to really discuss that, to present some ideas, to introduce some attributes that we find that successful consultants have, so that you can take a step back and say, you know what, I do think that this is the right move for me, or you know what, maybe not. That's the purpose.
That's excellent. Well, if any of you all have more questions, please attend the webinar, because you can have one-on-one, it's not really one-on-one, but it's dedicated time that you can actually ask questions directly with Ross. So we will make sure that at the end of this session, we will include the information about the May the 12th session, as well as how to connect with Ross. So again, have your questions prepared, come to the event, please register, and I think you'll have a good time. So once again, thank you so much, Ross. Thank you for being an expert who's just dedicated your time to help other professionals during this coronavirus pandemic. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Zara. You're the best.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Until next time.